We are well into an anxious 24 hours of projected heavy rains across the countries. And hours ago, a massive power failure struck the country, plunging most parts of the nation into an electricity blackout, which Kenya Power attributes to a system disturbance of the grid. And earlier today, the Weatherman announced that Cyclone Hidaya is making its way to the Kenyan coast, a prospect that will compound an already complicated weather season. And rough weather is also predicted in the direction of Agriculture CS Mithika Linturi, a man on the spot over the fake fertilizer scam. What does Parliament have up its sleeves? On Kaikai's Kicker, the newly inaugurated Bunge Tower may not be enough for Bunge. On Jamila's memo, the Ministry of Education's midnight escapades left parents insulted and embarrassed. On Sam's Sense, does it make sense to fix our drainage and leave out IEBC? And on My Take, the irony of maximum taxes and minimum wages. This is NEWSGANG.
Vile mambo yanavyoendelea, tutazidi na kuwa na mvua na mafuriko yatazidi. Masaa 48 kutokea kesho, kila mtu awe ametoka katika hiyo sehemu. Na ni katika sehemu zote za Kenya, mji wa Nairobi, miji zile zingine, kwa sababu hatutaki tena kupoteza maisha ya wananchi, na tutaweka mpango ya kutosha kuhakikisha kwamba tutawapatia chakula, tutawapatia malazi, tutawapatia mambo yale mengine yanayohitajika.
And that 48-hour deadline has now lapsed, asking people to move to what is now becoming proverbial higher ground. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the program. The hashtag is NEWSGANG at Citizen TV Kenya and our respective Twitter handles. X. Sorry, I'm old. It's taking a while. Welcome. Jamila, let's begin with the latest. So, you know, this is an evolving situation. What do we know, especially with the latest numbers, the latest crisis that we're dealing with the floods?
Yvonne, as it stands today, the latest statistics are 38 counties have been affected. This has gone up by 1. We were at 37, I think, yesterday or the day before. And then the number of dead is 188. That is according to government statistics. We have over 48,000 families that have been affected. That loosely translates to about 293,000 people. With statistics, usually they multiply the number of families by 5. That's the average. And then we have about 156,000 people who have been displaced. The number of missing is about 133. These statistics are from the Red Cross. And we've seen how the rains have been. Remember what the weatherman said, that we're going to witness heavy rainfall in Nairobi and parts of central and some areas in the country from today all the way to the weekend. And of course, the story we just heard about Cyclone Hidaya and what that may mean for us as it hits the Kenyan coast. And it's important to note that also our neighbors in Tanzania are also facing the same situation. They have about 155 people who've died. They have about almost 200,000 people have been displaced. They're saying the same things. We are asking people to move to higher ground. And for them, of course, this weather phenomenon was predicted by the Met Department as early as July 2023.
Yeah.
And at the time, yes.
Yeah, I want you to pause on that because we'll use that for comparison. You know, what Tanzania did, how they handled this, the whole idea of early warning systems and what you do with that once you get that warning. But, you know, so those are the latest statistics, and it's difficult to hear that 188 people have died in the span of less than a month.
Yes.
I mean, you know, first, at the beginning of this year, it was the number of dead through road accidents, which for the first quarter, I think, surpassed apparently the number of people who died during the COVID pandemic, you know, in the country. Now we have added another 188 in a short span of less than a month. But now, you know, the question is, okay, so that's what we know. What about the response? What have we seen, Sam, from from government as well as others. There's been a few questions about that. We've seen the president giving a 48-hour deadline to move to higher grounds. Cabinet Secretary Malonza said the same thing, move to higher grounds. Where is this?
Higher ground.
Higher ground. I'm tempted to think of, there's a Christian hymn around, higher ground, but maybe that's not what this one is.
Right. I think the biggest challenge has been, when you look at this crisis since it started, I think it has deepened the past 2 weeks. The biggest challenge has been the preparedness on the side of the people, on the side of government. Because I remember, again, the very first time that we heard of flooding, which was, I think, very early last week, it is people-driven responses is what we're witnessing. Whether it's the question of what happened in Tana River when you saw that boat capsizing, it is the people that are there that are responding. If you look at even...
Mathare?
I think yes, Mathare in Nairobi County. If you had to look at the images of Sultan Hamoud, that lorry that was ferrying sand, and there were people that were on it, it is the local residents that are responding. Again, if you look at the situation that of what happened in Mai Mahiu, it is the people around that area that are responding. If you look at Murang'a County, Gitugi Ward, during the mudslide, again, it is the people. So there's a bit of, in as much as disaster doesn't tell you we are coming, there's a bit of failure to use the projections that have come from the Kenya Meteorological Department, because every time they release a projection, they always give instructions on what should be done. They always say that people that are living in areas that are prone to floods should avoid moving or walking or driving in the water. They talk about people that are living in areas that are prone to mudslide and landslide. They should keep off, or they should move out. They ask them to move to higher ground. So on that front, and also the communication that was coming from the government was not sufficient, because yes, these statements from the Meteorological Department, they are made public, yes. They are specifically sent to the President, to the Cabinet Secretary in charge of Climate and Environment Affairs, that is Soipan Tuya, and other departments. But then how that information is cascaded to the people, for them to be aware, whether it's through public communication on the different platforms that we have in the country, that has not been very sufficient or very efficient. And that is why, even when you talk about, I remember I was on air on Monday morning when Gitugi happened in Murang'a County, and also we were speaking to a reporter, Ann Gige, in Nakuru, who was telling us about some 2 villages that had been swept by the floods, and she was still trying to get to understand what exactly had happened. And now the aftermath of it, when you look at the pictures, you sort of see how devastating it has been. So nobody prepared for that, but also in the response, it has not been as timely as you would have expected, especially when it comes to even saving those people whose lives may be at the highest danger. It has been wanting, and one can only hope that this can improve. But then again, even as she says about the warning that within 48 hours the people are supposed to move out, again now there's another statement from the Interior Ministry, which actually, in my opinion, when I look at it, it is more useful because it even lists the dams that are at risk. I think the number is 178. And it's telling them that within 24 hours from 6:30 p.m. on the 2nd of May, that means by 6:30 p.m. tomorrow, these people must have moved out of their areas. If they will not have left, then there will be mandatory evacuation or mandatory movement or forceful movement that should happen. So now we are getting to the point of, what do you say, enhanced communication, especially on the areas that you're talking about, because I remember on air this week, there's a panelist who was saying that there is an old mzee who was saying that they're not going to leave if they're going to leave their goat behind. And it's that place of, they value so much what they possess or what they own, but they don't have sufficient information or sufficient sensitization to make them see the danger that lurks around them. And now with that statement from the Interior Cabinet Secretary, if properly communicated, then I think it's the start of a proper preparedness when it comes to the response to this situation that we witness.
Yeah, and you know, you were talking about community. If you see what happened in Mathare when, you know, all hell broke loose, and that's symptomatic of a community that understands the absence of government and the absence of authority. So they've built such a strong social community network, that they know what to do, they mobilize each other, they know who they're looking for, they know where they're looking for their missing loved ones. And that for me is, whilst it's admirable, but it does speak to a group of people who know that, you know, you have your back and that nobody is coming to rescue you or save you. The other thing about this 48-hour deadline that I find interesting is even the wording and the framing. So we're asking people to move to higher ground. Where? Where do you go? I would imagine the idea would be we are evacuating people from their homes, and we have set up centers at social halls, at schools, at churches. We've set up temporary structures that are on that higher ground. So rather than telling people you've got 48 hours to move, why not evacuate them? Because evacuating implies that you have a plan for them. You have a safe house, a safe space from where you can, you know, attend to their needs, to hunker down, you know, for whatever is coming. But that's what I find interesting.
There's actually a bite,
it almost seems like you are, you know, left.
Like there's a bite on that. I think maybe we listen to that before Lina speaks. Okay. We should listen to bite 10. This is from residents of a village in Nyandarua speaking today.
Shule pale tunaambia tuende ni maji. Tutatorokea wapi? Tutaenda wapi? Mtu sikiria huruma. Mtu sikiria huruma yake. Hata ukiwaambia ukae hapa, hawezi kukaa, ni mawe. Utasikia uoga. Unaona hii maingu. Sasa tunafanya mna hii kutetemeka. Hatujui tutatokea nini. Lakini Mungu na askari watusikirie huruma yake.
Linus, maybe you can pick on what she says. She's talking about how the schools they're supposed to go to are flooded. They don't know where to go. Where they're being asked to relocate to is inhabitable for them.
And I think that's the information that the very elaborate statement from the Ministry of Interior just fell short of giving, because they have given a statement that is about 53 pages long, indicating even which areas are high risk and which ones are not. And in paragraph 6, they talk of putting adequate shelter. The ministry talks of adequate shelter, that's CS Kindiki, adequate shelter as well as food and non-food essential supplies to all those that will be affected. And then government will facilitate assembly points for those vacating or being evacuated, and logistical support to reach the reception centers where the temporary shelter and other forms of support will be provided. So from the statement from the CS Interior and National Administration Kindiki, Professor Kindiki, there is some indication that these assembly points are actually known, only that they are not in the statement. And this will be so important, especially in the next 12 to 24 hours when the vacation orders are in force, because you need a lady like that who was asking, where do I go, to know where to go.
Yeah.
And what we've realized in the past few days is no information is too little or unimportant, because we've also seen some really wrong calls on the part of members of the public. Wrong calls, for example, on just deciding to drive over a flooded area, be it a bridge or just some flooded area, or even on the advice to move to higher ground. You know, it doesn't help to ask, where do I go? I think be on the move first. And you know, these are some of the things that one would probably like to see the public responding better to emergency messages, because if they don't, then the consequences can be quite severe.
Yeah, that's right. And so let's talk about this early warning systems, and you know, no doubt this is something that's been seen everywhere. I mean, you know, Dubai had it recently. And like you were saying, Jamila, Tanzania also had the same thing.
Yes.
How are they dealing, you know, with this issue right now?
They have lost people, even about 155 people. But their rains started late last year. the raids started pounding, I think, sometime in late October, early November, and it's been going on till this year. They have different provinces that are affected. And for them, when the Weatherman gave the warning in July of 2023, they actually took steps to have representatives of the Met Department go from one province to another, kutoka mkoa moja hadi mwingine, to try and sensitize people, leadership of those areas, to tell them this is coming and you need to start taking action to minimize the loss and damage that will be experienced because of the El Nino phenomena that is coming. And even to some extent, maybe that's what we should have done. I know the politics of it aside, when the first warning did come sometime in end of October, and then we had the leadership of the country saying that really there is no El Nino. Do you know one of the effects of that was that aid agencies that had heeded the warning from the Met Department about the El Nino rains had actually started getting themselves ready, collecting funds, you know, mobilizing the food, the transportation, you know, all that they need, staff, so they'd be able to respond when it does hit. But then when a statement comes that the rains we are going to experience are not El Nino, what does that mean even for donors? The donors who are going to fund some of these projects, they're going to fund these aid organizations. They're saying, well, the government would know better that whatever is coming will not be as bad as you say. It
came from the highest quarters.
And it came from the highest office. And that's one of the things that they would ask, why do you need the extra money or the extra funding you're asking for something that's not even going to happen? And then when you talk about the response, we talked about response and how people are being helped where they are. I think some of the aid organizations, for instance, like Red Cross, are doing a better job to some extent than the government is in terms of reaching people where they are.
How are they doing this?
Even the boats, remember, even the boats in the cities, we're seeing it. They're using, of course, there are people in the ground in different areas, and they did heed what the Weatherman said, what the report said, areas that are prone to this and that, early enough to be able to go and even start taking down, registering people in those areas, those who would be affected. And they really use the local community in terms of like finding out who's who, nani anaishi hapa. Maybe they can say, Mama Fulani has a sick child, we forgot to include her, please include her in the list. And huyu sio hapa, huyu ni mgeni. And they use that list to be able to actually distribute aid to people. And I actually asked, what is in the hamper that we see that you're giving people for food?
Right.
And I was told there's 15 kilograms of unga, there's 3 to 4 kilograms of maharagwe and dengu. There's a liter of oil. There's also cooking salt. So by the time you're given that, it'll be able to sustain you for a bit. So there's a structured way of how they do it. Yeah. In fact, in Masai Mara, we had the tourists who are in trouble and marooned, but we also had villages that are actually marooned. Somewhere called Talek.
Yes.
Yeah, it's one of the areas that is marooned. And then somewhere in Magadi, there's a village called Shompole. Yeah. Actually, it was difficult for them to get there. They were actually airdropping food. So they actually have mechanisms for this, to be able to deliver food to those who really need it. Government is making efforts in some of these places, but I don't see like it's as structured as some of these organizations are in terms of actually the food. Maybe a little 50 kilos of food imekwa hapo, sukari and all that, but then vijana kujeni mugawe watu, and vijana kujeni mugawe watu, one, those vijanas will expect some form of payment, maybe they'll get their ration and someone else's, but and then there's a local administration
what happens
also
to the sick, the more vulnerable, the ones who can't make
there is no list.
It's a grab.
Yeah, it's a grab. There's actually no structure in terms of who will get what. So I think this way of approaching things, having listened to what experts had said, and then taking up action based on that is maybe what we should be doing.
Yeah, and Linus, listening to the experts, is that something we have done very well? I think we talked about it here last week on the program, that these warnings were given as early, Jamila, as
end of July, early August 2023.
Last year. Yeah. Almost a year ago. But Linus, what did we do with this expert advice and information and early warning?
We do not listen to experts. And the first illustration really is how the meteorological department has been treated. And there's one thing that really should stand out about the director, Dr. Gikungo, and that is he has been able to be consistent in his message right from back in the days. And I just want us, Robert, to listen to our soundbite. We want to look back to how we first received this information about the weather, and then there was a back and forth between the Met Department and the highest political officers at the State House. So let's listen to 1 and 2 before we go to Dr. Gikungu.
Hata juzi mlisikia tukawa na habari pengine kutakuwa na El Nino ambayo itaharibu kule, itaharibu mali ingine, lakini Mungu ni nani? Mmesikia wale watu wamesema tena ile El Nino haitakuweko, wamesema kutakuwa tu na mvua kubwa lakini haitafika pale ya kuharibu. Si tunamshukuru Mungu jameni? So na hiyo mvua nyingi ambayo tutapata, pia tumejipanga katika hii short rains. Tumepanga pia wakulima watuzalishie chakula tena, so that we have another harvest by January or February.
We have had a long meeting about the situation in the country, the rains, the floods, the displacements, and the confusions surrounding the whole space. Whether there is El Nino or not, whether there is above rain or not, and the whole of that. Maybe before I make the statement on behalf of the team that we have met, I want to call the Director of Meteorological Department to tell the country what it is.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Na hamjambo wananchi. I want to point out that as initially given in the forecast, we have El Nino in this short rain season 2023, and we do apologize for the lack of communication or miscommunication, because that was a big mistake, but we are sorry about that. And moving forward, let's prepare ourselves for the enhanced rainfall as a result of the El Nino phenomenon that we are in at this time. Asanteni.
So enhanced rainfall, and then there is an apology, which I'm not sure what the apology was for.
But he started off by saying, I want to confirm there is El Nino.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I apologize for that, or?
For the misinformation.
For the misinformation that might have,
Yes. And then I think that's recently we then spoke to Dr. Gikungu again.
It was actually shortly after that.
Shortly after that.
So when he asked him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and let's listen to him.
I have to ask this, Daktari, before we let you go, because a lot of Kenyans were asking, what was behind the miscommunication that led to, you know, the back and forth on the El Nino forecast?
I hope one day I'll find out the truth.
But you're the weatherman.
Yes, I am the weatherman.
So was the science wrong?
No.
Did someone just decide to?
Robert, I know there is a blackout, but that's not it. I think that is from our end. And that is the voice of Dr. Gikungu, who Yvonne, I think, has been very consistent.
Yeah.
And I think one of the key learnings that once a country gets over this emergency, one of the key learnings really is to use our experts better, listen to them more closely, and act as per their advice. Because, look, they are guided by pure science, that is what the science of weather reporting. And I think that's what Dr. Gikungu has been very, very consistent with.
You know, it's a non-political space, the space of science. And we'll try and fix that clip and get it to play again. But he did talk about how, you know, these are scientists and they sit in their space and they don't just sit down and make these predictions by themselves. They also consult widely with their counterparts, you know, in the region, on the continent and across the globe. There is the World Meteorological Organization that the Kenya Met Department is a member of. So these are not things that are, you know, sort of said and done in a localized situation. And just to point out that he did say much earlier last year that these rains, this El Nino, this enhanced rainfall, above average rainfall, you know, we're quibbling over terminologies, but he did warn that this would actually go into April. Well, we're just 2 days out of that. But
followed by enhanced
rainfall. Yeah. But then see what happens. We rubbish them, we parade them in front of the country and say, come here and apologize. And so that then wonders, if you said that, then of course all of the billions that were set aside, distributed to the counties, some to other agencies, within government that are to do with this, one can only imagine that after it comes from the highest office in the land, but then everybody says, well, okay, yeah, good, well, look, death is inevitable, and a lot of this is also natural disaster, but you do have to wonder if we might have been maybe better prepared or responded earlier or listened and maybe started to put in place more preparatory measures. Perhaps people would still have died. Would it have been to this extent? Perhaps property would have been damaged, for sure. Would it have been to this extent? This is
maybe something to just add to that conversation, the back and forth 6 months ago. And if you recall, there had been the warning of El Nino. The deputy president had organized a meeting with county governors, and they had arrived at a figure of some 10 billion shillings that was required to respond to the phenomenon that was being awaited. Then the president came out and said that we have prayed and there's not going to be the El Nino situation or the phenomenon itself. It's only that we're going to have more rainfall. Then shortly after, the situation started hitting the country, and therefore the deputy president held a meeting. And I think at that time, the president was away. He had traveled out of the country. And it felt like this was an opportunity to correct what wrong an impression had been created by the sentiments of the state officers at that time. And therefore, when the deputy president was calling Gikungu to come and make the apology, then it sounded clearly like that, to just restore the original communication and therefore continue to make a case for now the response that was going to happen. But if you recall, at that time, the political class was very critical of the request for 10 billion shillings by the counties. It felt like maybe they were asking for resources for misuse. And if you recall, there were even plans of how different counties were going to spend the resources on, including procuring some boats for some cities to be in a position to wade through the waters. So there was a lot of political interference in that communication from the meteorological department. And of course, it cannot be overstated the fact that even reading a weather forecast that has been sent from the Kenya Meteorological Department, you cannot read it with a political lens or a political viewfinder. If you try to do that, then you're going to miss it, because part of it is technical, but then there's a point where it gets to the instructions or the warning cautions that or the warning that is being given to different offices or different persons that will be affected by the phenomenon they are talking about.
Yeah, I want us to listen to his clarification. Sorry to interrupt, but I think it'll make your point much clearer. The clip that we had before we got the blackout. Let's listen to it again with Dr. Gikungu from the Met Department, clarifying on this back and forth, misinformation, disinformation, enhanced and whatever. Let's listen.
Dr. before we let you go, because a lot of Kenyans were asking, what was behind the miscommunication that led to the back and forth on the El Nino forecast?
I hope one day I'll find out the truth.
But you're the weatherman.
Yes, I am the weatherman.
So was the science wrong?
No.
Did someone just decide to?
The statements we've been giving, what you would call official communication, have not suggested increase or decline or anything that would withdraw the El Nino phenomenon. And all I know is that people have associated El Nino with rainfall, almost to the extent of calling rainfall El Nino, which is not the case. And that is why I take the trouble to explain that it is a signal, and it has to be coupled with other signals for it to form rainfall in excess, as we are seeing now. Because there are also other places that when we have an El Nino season or event as we are having now, to those places such as Australia, it's drought. Yeah. When they hear that the forecast suggests El Nino, they prepare themselves for drought.
And Yvonne, it is very important to put into context what he's saying, because he's talking about the official communication. And the communication, he indicates the message is addressed to the following.
Yes. Yeah.
The Presidency, Cabinet Secretary, Environment, Principal Secretary, Environment, National Intelligence Service, Government Spokesperson, Kenya Red Cross, Kenya Maritime Authority, Kenya Ports Authority, Kenya Airport Authority, National Disaster Operations Center, National Disaster Management Unit, media, relevant government ministries, Council of Governors, county directors of meteorological services. It doesn't say anywhere politicians.
Yeah.
Unless you lead a certain office that is listed there. So it was such a loss. And obviously, having learned how miscommunication or misinformation can lead to a failure to plan, one would have expected that this rainy season that was projected to be more enhanced, sometimes above normal rainfall, the recordings that have been taken in the month of April, and we're looking at that on data point that would show we have broken every trend in the past, apart from one area, which is Voi, that we've received rainfall that is lower than the average over the past many years. You look at so many regions across the country have actually received rainfall that is more than double what on average they have been receiving. So if you had to look at the patterns, because the month of April, the data they have is up to 26th of April. By the first 2 weeks or by the first 3 weeks, it should have been possible to project and see this is where this rainfall is headed, and this is what needs to be done. Again, getting back to the question of, for instance, what transpired in Mai Mahiu. And of course, you speak to different sources and they tell you, yes, there was gullies that were filling up, what was collecting and forming what could be, could appear like a dam. Of course, if you had to look at the definition of dam, then it might be, because the dam is, you just need to put a barrier that stops water from moving. But they will tell you that they had seen a lot of things. Then again, you wonder if the Kenya Railway, what is the name? The Kenya Railways Limited is in charge of the railway. Never mind that it's over a century old. What do they do in monitoring that infrastructure, that piece of infrastructure? Because
that might have been the first warning, right? That there was something happening. Because
if you have roads in the country, for instance, you have the expressway. If something happens, and it did happen last year when there were demonstrations and there was a bill put there of how much it was going to repair it, and indeed it was repaired. So the Kenya Railways, what do they do on a daily basis when they are monitoring the track all the way from Mombasa to Malaba? What do they do? Because if things have been developing over the years, if the gullies have been blocking or the tunnels have been blocking over the years, an accumulation of water, and you know there's a heavy downpour that is coming, heavy rainfall that is coming, what are you thinking as you manage that resource? Because probably, like you asked the question, could we have probably mitigated the effects of some of these things? If that had been seen and there was a responsible official or officer that is able to see that and advise the relevant authority, probably action may have been taken to at least reduce what we really suffered.
Or maybe not, with the way we've handled the early warning on this one. I
think, Yvonne, one of the things that could be hampering our efforts to actually be prepared to tackle disaster is the lack of a law. We do not have a national disaster management law. Because if there was an institution that was charged with this, that would be under law, maybe we'd be able to handle better. Money is allocated for disasters, but it's allocated to the governor's office, Akona Kijogo, MP Akona, Women Rep Akona. So there isn't really an institution that looks at national disaster. In 2017, actually, the then Isiolo County Women Rep Tia Galgalo sponsored the first ever disaster management bill. It did not see the light of day. And some of the things that was in that bill was establishing a disaster risk management authority. So it's supposed to work with the county government and the national government to deal with catastrophes and also offer advice in terms of risk management measures. It also wanted to have a disaster risk management fund that's supposed to provide money for things like disaster preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. A lot of things. There are a lot of proposals. The government will be compelled to pay into a fund which is not less than 2% of its total revenue, in addition to any aid or assistance that will be received to manage disaster in the country. This bill had so much in it in terms of even forming county disaster risk management committees that will be chaired by the governor, so at least you're able to manage it in the county setting. But then It is now called the National Disaster Risk Management Bill of 2023 that was sponsored by Leader of Majority Kimani Ichung'wah, and it was Bill number 24 of 2023. Now, it went through the first reading on August 9, 2023 and stopped there. So there were some efforts by counties to come up with what they call the County Fire and Rescue Services Act. That bill was passed by some counties, but then they were asked to relax the process until there's a national government to have an act. So hakuna sheria ya kuangalia maswala. You see now what
how many disasters do we need for us to eventually do this? Because I mean, we've had El Nino even since 1998. I mean, or how many more people have to?
I don't know. That's the thing, because we grapple with disasters when they happen.
Yeah.
We don't know what to do. Yeah.
I mean, it may be new and unique in terms of the extent and whatever, but this is not new. But clearly,
and it's unfortunate, Yvonne, that the Constitution it has shared functions. And function number 24 of the national government is to deal with the disaster. Function number 12 of the counties is to deal with firefighting and disaster. They are supposed to be dealing with storm waters, that is the county governments. So if the functions have been assigned by the Constitution to both levels of government, even if there's no act of parliament to really guide how that is supposed to be done, if you are told that one of your duties is to wake up and go to work, you don't need...
You need a law.
You don't need a law
to effect that. But I want to...
Yeah, I think there's something we're forgetting around the desk here, and that is something someone advised, that government is not an agony auntie.
Oh.
So, but on a more pertinent note, yes, the scale of disasters also matter. And this is arguably Kenya's worst in history. It's bigger in scale. The amount of water, the sheer amount of water that our functioning and basically drainage system is dealing with is not precedented. It's completely unprecedented. So there's obviously the bit where you could almost say no one is to blame. This is huge. But obviously what Kenyans would always question is our emergency response protocols.
Yeah.
Are they sound? Are they prepared for days like this? And for those saying government is not agony auntie, actually governments exist for days like this.
Yes.
The reason we have government is because there are challenges that are greater than those that a family can handle, Nyumba Kumi can handle. That is why you have this pool of strength called government, where you put in money and you put in your taxes, hire people, hire advisors, pay them, to come up with the best decisions on days like this. And on days like this, that's not all you tell the public. You don't tell them that they shouldn't look for answers from government, because governments actually exist for days like this. And I'm actually tempted to just speculate, what could President William Ruto be telling the country tomorrow afternoon when he addresses the nation at 1 p.m. It certainly has something that may have overlooked some of these opinions about government not being an agony auntie. And I think the president may rightly and correctly stand and turn up as per the occasion. Look at how the country is. We are in the middle of a massive, potentially massive disaster, and speak to the plans that government has to address. I mean, when you look at the post-flood scenario, this is we're just in the beginning of a huge problem that we'll have to work with for a number of months going forward. Start with the families that have been completely displaced. We all remember the images from Mai Mahiu. Those are real people. Those are fellow Kenyans. Homes have been swept off and basically reduced to bare land. How do they recover? Now, the humanitarian disaster alone
is now unfolding.
Is now unfolding. Then the second bit, something that, and you engaged CS Murkomen the other day here, about the infrastructure bit. The infrastructure has taken quite a beating. There are bridges that will need to be replaced. There are roads like the Garissa
at Madogo area.
Madogo area that really have to be redone. So, and you know, we've been talking about our financial situation. We don't have money for this. We have pending bills. Now we have pending problems, you know, waiting to be addressed. And who but a perfect agony aunt to address this?
Yeah, you know, the humanitarian crisis that's unfolding, there will be disease, cholera outbreaks and other waterborne diseases that, you know, are on the way. Remember, we've just, what happens to the harvest and people who'd planted, because there are some places where farms have been completely submerged and in this deluge. So that means the cost of food, the cost of living is about to rise. The cost of living will also rise. I mean, if the government needs to look for money to repair all of that damaged infrastructure. So, I mean, like you say, we're at the start of something. And about being, you know, an agony aunt, we delegate power and authority and we give resources to the government to work on our behalf. So yes, government is our agony aunt, and we will call it what you want, whine, whinge, whatever it is, because we delegate that authority to them. They do not have power over us. They answer to the people because it's delegated powers and authority. Hopefully one day, we will remember that. And they're there for public service. And we employ them. And we dutifully pay our taxes, sometimes without, with no choice. But listen, what we're going through is unprecedented. We also experienced something unprecedented not too long ago, and that was the death of a Chief of Defense Forces while in office. But perhaps unlike what we've seen here, there's been an orderly manner in which that has been handled in that transition. We'll come and talk about that, as well as the ongoings in Parliament. This is News.